The blast didn't register as sound. It was more of a shove from the planet itself, as if Carver had been kicked in the chest by a giant fist of flame and shrapnel. Then he was airborne, eyes wide in the acidic rain, body twisting through the burn-yellow mist of the atmosphere. When he hit the mud, he didn't bounce. He stayed down, not moving, not breathing. For a moment, then the screaming started. Not his. A high-pitched trill that cut through the storm and burrowed into his skull. Carver turned his head slowly, vision swimming. He couldn't hear his own groans over the rain hammering his earpiece, but the tactical HUD was still half alive, flickering with damage readouts. The comms were dead. His leg was wrong. So was his shoulder. There was blood. A lot of it. "Zelan," he rasped, choking on the metal-tinted air. "Where?" He found the medic 30 yards back, twisted like a fallen tree, one arm shattered beneath the rest of his torso. The alien's breathing mask was cracked down the center. The specialized lenses over his compound eyes flickered like dying embers. Zealand wasn't moving either. Carver tried to crawl. That lasted about 3 seconds before the pain in his abdomen turned to fire. He collapsed into the muck, his blood mixing with the phosphorescent rainwater. Gritting his teeth, he checked his abdominal panel. The readout was worse than he'd feared. Internal bleeding, a torn oblique muscle likely from the blast, circulatory stress already spiking, signs of shock, real shock, the kind that meant your body was trying to shut down and let the dark in. Protocol said stabilize, assess, wait for evac. But the extraction point was 3 miles west. No signal, no help, just him, dying slower than he should, and Zelan, who'd die faster. Carver let out a shaky breath. He had been stabilized by Zelan 3 months earlier, during the glacial breach on Titan IV. He remembered the way the alien had worked through a blizzard to close a compound fracture on his thigh with hands shaking from hypothermia. He owed him. "All right," Carver muttered, voice thick. "You saved my ass. Now it's my turn." Getting to his feet was the first mistake. His vision tunneled immediately, black creeping in from the corners. He fell again, knees hitting the ground hard enough to jar his ribs. The second try, he leaned on the broken remains of a fuel rod case, braced his ruined shoulder against the impact plate of his armor, and pushed up. The world spun. He stayed up. Step by step, he closed the distance to Zelan. The ground steamed under the acidic rain, each drop leaving chemical burns on exposed skin. Carver's gloves were shredded. He felt every sting. But he made it. The alien was unconscious but alive. Shallow breaths, mottled skin tone, pulse detectable but erratic. Carver didn't waste time. He checked the shattered breathing mask. One filter was completely destroyed, the other half hanging from its mount. Without the filter, Zelan would suffocate within minutes. Carver yanked his own secondary filter from his armor pouch. Not designed for Zelan physiology, but better than nothing. He held it up, pressed it over the crack, taped it with field sealant, then forced a dose of stimulant gel into the alien's neck port. Zelan jolted, hissed, then stared at him, eyes fluttering with confusion. What happened? Trap. Improvised mine. Fragmentation. You're down a limb and a lung, and we're out of time. Zelan tried to sit up. Broset Ube cried out. The pain made his body seize. You can't move. If you try, you'll bleed out. I have to carry you. You are unwell, bleeding. Your body is in circulatory distress. You should not exert. Carver gave a thin, mirthless laugh. No kidding. The alien's gaze sharpened. This is not logical. Neither was you hiking into a blizzard to set my femur back in place. Shut up and let me do this. He bent down, his ribs screamed. His abdomen clenched with raw agony. He felt liquid warmth down his side and knew it was blood, not rain. Zelan wasn't light. His physiology was denser than a human's, more mass packed into a smaller frame. Lifting him required every scrap of strength Carver had left. He got him up, just barely. One arm wrapped under Zealand's knees, the other around his shoulders. Fire shot through Carver's shoulder. His vision flickered again. Then he started walking. The rain didn't pause. The acid carved through his armor slowly, tracing chemical lines along his forearms and thighs. Blisters formed where his sleeves had torn. He shifted Zealand's weight carefully with each step, avoiding the jagged wreckage scattered across the marsh. Every step was a math problem he had to solve without thinking. Which leg was stronger now? Which angle would cause less agony? Which twitch meant his liver was leaking? By the time he reached the half-mile mark, Carver had vomited twice and lost sensation in his left hand. He adjusted his grip anyway. Zealand stirred again. "You must stop. You are experiencing pre-syncope. Yep, you will collapse. Probably, you will die." Carver's voice was a whisper now. "Maybe. But I'm not doing it lying down." A shriek split the sky then, something fast and mechanical howling overhead. Not a dropship, not friendly. A drone, maybe. It didn't fire, just watched. Carver didn't stop. At the mile mark, he dropped. His knees buckled and he crumpled into the mud, Zealand half crushed beneath him. For a long minute he couldn't breathe, just gasped, eyes wide, rain etching lines into his cheeks. "You must rest," Zealand said weakly. "I rest, you die. Then we both die." Carver spat blood. "Not yet." He pushed again, got his knees under him. Muscles screamed in revolt. The pain wasn't sharp anymore. It was cold, distant, like a radio signal fuzzing out. The second mile was worse. His body stopped sweating. Not good. That meant the circulatory shock was entering the next phase. Blood wasn't reaching the skin. His pulse was fluttering. His fingertips were blue. His mind started floating off. Bits of song lyrics and childhood memories drifting into his field of view like loose leaves. He made himself talk to stay awake. Not to Zealand. Just words, random phrases. "Sandlot baseball. 8 years old. Dad made nachos." "Your left eye is dilated," Zealand murmured. "Your core temperature is dropping." No kidding. The third mile was a dream, not a good one. He saw shadows, burned trees, melted slag. The ground glowed in places. The acid was eating through to the bedrock. The world didn't want them here. Every cell in his body begged him to lie down. So he walked. When the ground finally turned from boiling marsh to black stone landing pad, Carver didn't register it. He just took another step. Then, another. Then he collapsed. The last thing he saw before the black took him was the blur of lights descending through the yellow sky. He hoped they were real. Bryce's boots slipped on the moss-slick rocks as he adjusted Threx's weight across his shoulders. Every jolt sent a white-hot spear through his lower abdomen. His right leg, torn from calf to knee by shrapnel, barely obeyed him. But Threx's gurgling breath behind his ear was louder than the pain. The alien's breathing mask was cracked straight across the filter, and his chest convulsed like a fish plucked from water. The rain thickened. It sizzled on contact, eating into the polymer of Bryce's uniform and searing any exposed skin. His gloves had melted at the fingertips. His right palm left a trail of bloody smears on the grip of his pulse rifle, now strapped awkwardly across his back. The weapon was useless, fused shut by the electromagnetic pulse, but the weight of it felt like something to hold on to. Like identity. 10 minutes passed. Bryce didn't count them consciously, but he marked the terrain. Down the collapsed ridge, over the bramble that scraped like glass, up the side of a shallow ravine. One step, then another, then another. At the ravine crest, his legs folded without warning. He landed on his knees. The pain made him grunt, low and deep, like something primal breaking through. "You are deteriorating," Threx rasped, barely audible, Put me down. Bryce turned his head, rainwater cascading down his nose. You shut up. You cannot reach the evac point. You are exhibiting signs of hypovolemia. Pale skin, cold sweat. You need compression, fluids. Bryce laughed once. It sounded more like a cough. Yeah, well, the field kit got blown 50 yards into a boiling puddle. You gonna magic me an IV out of those 2 fingers you've still got working? Threx fell silent. Bryce staggered back to his feet. 20 yards later, the leg gave out again. He rolled onto his side, vision tunneling. Static danced across his eyes, and his teeth chattered. Time blurred. He wasn't sure how long he lay there. A minute? 5? But his hand crawled toward the crumpled fragment of their emergency transponder. What was left of it? No signal, nothing but blinking red. They were a dead frequency. You saved me, Bryce muttered aloud. Not for Threx, but maybe for himself. Outside Rascalon, you cracked my lung pressure in under 20 seconds. You were flatlining. You pulled me back. Statistically improbable, but not impossible. Which is alien for thanks? Threx blinked slowly, the blue flush of his dermal plating fading to a sickly gray. Bryce propped himself upright. His pulse pounded in his ears, his lips blue. The shrapnel must have nicked his liver. That would explain the hollow ache in his side, the nauseating pressure when he moved. He tore a strip from his undershirt, jammed it against the wound, and gritted his teeth. A makeshift pressure pad. It wasn't much, but it slowed the warm trickle under his ribs. Then he stood again. 1 step, then another, then another. They reached a plateau littered with old wreckage from a past skirmish. Metal twisted into impossible shapes, bones fossilized by acidic exposure. He didn't stop walking. The rain hissed louder, like it was angry now. Behind his shoulder, Thrax's breath came shorter. The alien's secondary heart had failed. Bryce could tell by the way the alien sagged, like gravity had redoubled for him. He needed air. Bryce dropped to one knee and fumbled through the charred pouch at his side. 2 ampules remained from his backup resupply, not meant for alien biology, but the emergency kit had a bypass cannula, and Bryce had seen Threx insert one on another Iridae once. High collarbone, subjugular route. I have no viable intake port, Threx gasped. Not ideal, Bryce muttered, prying open the cannula with shaking fingers. But you're not dying in the mud while I still got a pulse. He drove the tube in. Not clean, not sterile. He could be flooding Thrax's lymphatic system with contaminants. But the mask wasn't working, and without oxygen enrichment, Thrax wouldn't last another mile. The alien convulsed once. Then his breathing slowed, still shallow, but regular. Bryce shoved the empty ampoule aside and lifted Threx back over his shoulder. His right eye was swelling shut. He didn't remember when that started. Another ravine, a field of spiked fungi that hissed and contracted at his steps. One collapsed underfoot, releasing a burst of caustic vapor. Bryce screamed, stumbled, and bit through his tongue, trying not to fall. Minutes later, a thin trickle of blood escaped from his left ear. He ignored it. Half a mile down, the landscape changed. Jagged cliffs gave way to dunes of burnt crystal. The evac point was close, closer than it had ever been. Bryce could feel it in the pulse of his own stubborn heartbeat. He dropped again. This time, the impact drove the wind from his lungs. He didn't get up right away. Threx stirred, wheezing. You are... I know, Bryce said, breath hitching. Shock. Internal bleeding. Blood pressure dropping. You need medical intervention. Really? He wheezed. Hadn't noticed? His left hand shook uncontrollably as he braced against the ground. Somewhere in the distance, faint, so faint, came a soft, rhythmic beep. The proximity scanner on the evac beacon. It wasn't broadcasting, but the receiver still pinged at close range. They were within a mile. Bryce pushed up again. Every nerve screamed. His vision flickered, but he rose. 1 step, then another, then another. The rain hadn't let up. If anything, it had thickened into something heavier than water, the drops smearing on impact like a mix of acid and oil. Bryce had wrapped his left arm in the scorched remains of his field cover to guard against further burns, but the fabric had begun to dissolve hours ago. His right leg no longer felt like part of him. The calf muscle had locked into a spasm so constant that his entire gait had warped into a dragging hobble. But the beacon's signal grew stronger, that steady chirp like a heartbeat. He felt the edge of the valley before he saw it. A shallow trench carved between brittle ridges where the earth had caved in long ago. It was a basin now, a collection point for runoff, filled with brackish liquid that hissed and smoked. The only way forward was through it. Bryce studied the basin's edge. It wasn't wide, maybe 30 yards across, but deep enough that one wrong step meant drowning in acid. Threx stirred behind him. "We are near extraction," the alien croaked. His voice was nearly gone. "Leave me and return. Your vitals are unsustainable." "No one's getting left," Bryce rasped. His throat was raw from the air. "If I stop now, I don't get back up." His legs buckled at the edge of the trench, and for a moment he just stared at the rippling pool. He couldn't go around. The cliffs boxed in the whole perimeter. Only way was through. He tested the slope. The mud sizzled beneath his heel. Unstable. Gritting his teeth, he lowered himself sideways, bracing with one hand. He slipped halfway, catching himself against a stone outcrop, barely holding Threx's weight. It took 6 minutes to cross. His boots, what was left of them, disintegrated at the soles. He screamed once, but didn't stop. The acid carved channels across his shins. Skin peeled in strips. When he reached the far side, he had to roll onto his back just to breathe. The beacon was close enough now that even Threx could hear it. "Signal detected," the alien murmured. "Beacon 7 Charlie, automated, operational. We are 400 meters." Bryce sat up slowly. He was shaking now. Badly. His fingertips had gone white, nails bruised. Shock had fully set in. The pain from his abdomen was dull now, pulsing instead of sharp. That scared him more than anything. He hauled Threx back onto his shoulders and began the final stretch. The terrain turned to black sand, littered with razor-sharp crystal formations. The winds picked up. They carried traces of metal-rich spores that stung the eyes and stripped moisture from the throat. Bryce staggered, fell, crawled 10 feet, stood again. He heard something strange then, his own voice, but younger. Laughter in his ear. A memory from training camp on Titan Base echoing in his head. Hallucinations, not good. "Bryce," Threx said suddenly, "your pupils are blown. You are on the edge of unconsciousness. Stop. Tell me when I'm dead? Statistically, in 15 to 20 minutes. Then we'd better make it in 10. He crested the last ridge just as the ground below shimmered with movement. For a second, he thought he was hallucinating again. Then the evac drone appeared. A smooth, black shape unfurling from camouflage netting. Half buried, unmanned but functional. The hatch responded to the beacon, opening with a hiss. Bryce didn't cheer, didn't cry, just collapsed beside it. Not inside, just close enough to feel the heat radiating from its intake vents. His hands shook as he reached for the release latch. Couldn't find it. Threx moved, barely. With one remaining functional hand, he tapped the drone's side panel. The ramp descended. Bryce tried to lift Threx one last time. His arms failed. He dropped to his knees and screamed, not from pain, but from the loss of control. The drone was there. Safety was within arm's reach. But he couldn't move. Then Threx spoke again. "One final effort, Bryce. I can pull. You push." They shifted together. Threx slumped across the ramp. Bryce pressed from behind, blood from his torn palms streaking across the metal. Inch by inch. It took 5 minutes. Once Threx was aboard, Bryce slumped beside the open hatch. The acid rain still fell, streaking down his face like war paint. The drone pinged again, scanning for life signs. Medical alert. Pilot compromised. Critical vitals detected. Initiating emergency override. Drone began cycling a metastasis chamber. Threx was pulled inside automatically, sensors locking around his arm. Air was scrubbed, pressure stabilized. Bryce reached for the edge of the hatch. His arm wouldn't lift. The drone hesitated. Then, with a soft mechanical whine, it deployed its external armature and dragged Bryce inside like cargo. Darkness folded around him. Not silence. There was the soft hum of machines, the hiss of repressurization. And then the sting of an IV entering his forearm. Cold saline first, then something sharp. Painkillers. Vasopressors. Maybe a stabilizer. He didn't argue. He passed out before the drone's engines ever lifted them off the ground. The first thing Bryce noticed was the smell. Sterile, cold, tinged with ozone and recycled air. Medical bay. Then came the pain. Not a stab. Not the familiar burn of wounds freshly made, but something deeper, slow and unrelenting, as if every nerve ending was being reconnected, strand by strand. He opened his eyes and immediately shut them. The lights above were too bright. His body didn't want to move. It didn't want to do anything. A voice drifted through the fog. Vitals are stabilizing. Keep the fluids running. Start him on hemoglobin rebuild and broad-spectrum antibiotics. Another voice, familiar, low, rough, closer now. Ice. He blinked again, turned his head a fraction. Threx stood by the bedside, one arm in a carbon exosplint. New dermal mesh covered the side of his face. His secondary eye was covered, probably undergoing regeneration, but he was standing. "Hey," Bryce whispered. His throat rasped. "You look like hell." Threx tilted his head slightly. "And you sound like a bag of wet gravel." Bryce would have laughed, but it hurt to breathe. He tried to move his right hand, felt the tug of an IV, and stopped. What lay beneath the thick layer of ice? How long? 4 days. He nodded slowly. That tracks. "You were in circulatory shock for over an hour," Threx said. "Liver trauma, severe acid burns, 2 cracked ribs, nearly complete dehydration. Your right calf had necrotic tissue by the time the drone docked. They debated amputation." Bryce glanced down. His leg was elevated in a foam brace, swaddled in pale gel wraps. No amputation. Still his leg. "For now," he sighed. "So I'm a mess." "Yes, but alive. Functionally." A human doctor entered. Dr. Abrams, if Bryce remembered right. She scanned the vitals, adjusted the IV rate, then gave him a tired, relieved smile. "You shouldn't be alive," she said without ceremony. "You shouldn't have made it past the ridge, much less the basin. You were a few minutes away from cardiac collapse." Bryce turned his head again toward Threx. "You tell her we don't quit?" "I told her you are an anatomical paradox fueled by pure irrationality." "Same thing?" Dr. Abrams chuckled. "You'll be here for a while, weeks at minimum. We've stabilized the internal bleeding, but you're on daily dialysis until liver function improves. The burns will heal with the synth skin, but you'll need physio. The leg injury's complicated. We're using tissue regrowth rather than grafting. Slower, but better long-term outcome." "How long before I can walk?" "Not for at least 10 days. Maybe longer, depending on nerve response." Bryce nodded faintly. "All right." She studied him. "You shouldn't have survived." He didn't answer. There wasn't anything left to say. He left. Threx remained by the bed, silent for a long time. Bryce didn't mind. The room was warm. The sheets didn't smell like blood. No rain overhead. That was enough for now. Then the alien spoke. "I reviewed your mission logs, your biosignal, the readings. You were in stage 3 shock within the first hour. Walking under those conditions is statistically non-existent." "You said that already." "I meant it." Bryce stared at the ceiling. "I didn't think I was going to make it." "I know, but I couldn't leave you." "I know." Another silence. Then Threx shifted gingerly. like the movement still hurt. "I have submitted a joint commendation report to Allied Command," he said. "They asked me for mission data. I gave them your steps. Every one of them. I told them how you carried me. I told them about the trench, the acid, the moment your heart rate flatlined for 12 seconds before spiking back. I told them you did it while dying." Bryce let out a slow breath, and what did they say? They didn't believe me. A dry laugh bubbled in Bryce's throat. Of course they didn't. But they awarded you anyway. Bryce rolled his eyes toward him. "You get one too." Threx gave a slow blink. "I am to receive a medical distinction for services rendered while unconscious." It finally broke a smile. They sat in silence again for a while, not out of awkwardness, but comfort. The steady beeping of vitals, the hiss of machines, the reassurance of being alive. "Threx," Bryce said eventually, "when we get back out there, maybe don't pick recon missions on planets where the rain tries to eat you." Threx tilted his head. "Statistically, those are the only missions where I learn anything interesting about humans. You're a menace. You're an anomaly." Rice stared at the ceiling again. His leg throbbed. His torso ached. He was deeply, thoroughly exhausted. But he was alive, and so was Threx. He drifted into sleep with the knowledge that, sometimes, surviving wasn't about odds. Sometimes it was about the next step, then another.